In terms of energy, it's an area we're seeing such innovation in. And, it's one of the challenges with working across so many markets is you can't apply a blanket. We're going to do this across the whole tour because it just doesn't work. It's not going to be possible. But one of the great things is the various innovations that keep coming up in different markets.
Hi, everyone. It's John Fiella here with the Golf Sustainability Podcast, and I'm very excited about my conversation today with Maria Grandinetti Milton, who's the Director of Sustainability for the DP World Tour. This will be, without question, one of the most fascinating conversations we've had because the DP World Tour, in my opinion, is well ahead of the pack in terms of their efforts in the golf industry to produce sustainable events. The plan they've put together is, in my view, the most comprehensive plan that I've seen in the industry to date. And we are so fortunate to have the leader and author of that plan with us. Maria, welcome to the Golf Sustainability Podcast.
So lovely to finally be on and meet you.
Well, listen, why don't we start by having you tell us a little about your career journey and your current role?
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your podcast and I guess for shining a light on what golf is doing from an environmental perspective. I think it's so important, as we'll get onto in a little bit more detail. I grew up playing every sport possible and really carried this on as an adult. And I hadn't really been aware that you could work in sport when I was growing up. It just wasn't on my radar, which seems really silly now that there are, so many careers in sport. But I started out my corporate career really in communications. I fell into working in rugby at the Scottish Rugby Union, and that was it from a sports perspective. I have always really felt that sport has the power to change lives and to overcome boundaries and unite us as a human race globally. And I think that's really been my driving force for staying in the sports industry. But my role moved on very quickly from comms into commercial and partnerships. I stayed in rugby on global roles in the British and Irish Lions tour to Australia in 2013. I worked on the HSBC 7 series and I really enjoyed the global nature of what we were doing, but not only the elite, but also a lot of the grassroots activations that we would do alongside these and using that sort of elite platform to try and raise awareness for whatever the sport was whatever message was there from the sports perspective. And I joined the European Tour group around 7 years ago now and moved finally from the partnerships world and the sort of that commercial side into sustainability around in 2021 when they opened up. They had created an opening for a CSR role. And I thought that was a calling for me. It was a real opportunity to bring together everything I'd learned through some of my other brand activations and to create the strategy for the tour. So it really was a no-brainer and something I've really thrived on. So I made the move in 2021 and have never really looked back.
That's great. Well, I'm really looking forward to getting into as much detail as we can on the work that you're doing. I've learned so much in kind of getting to know you. I had no idea that the DP World Tour conducted events in 24 countries. And then to find out it's really just one part of the European Tour group. Give our listeners an overview of the DP World Tour and how it fits into this broader European Tour group.
Of course. Yeah. And I appreciate it's not the clearest of landscapes for anyone. When I got into golf, it took me quite a long time to understand the landscape because it's unlike any other I've worked in. So the DP World Tour is the main men's professional tour on the European Tour group. So it's kind of equivalent to the PGA Tour. We have several co-sanctioned events within it, but it's effectively a global schedule. So as you referenced, we have 44 tournaments in 24 countries, which it's quite extraordinary. And within that, we have 5 uplifted events, the Rolex Series events, which I think are probably equivalent to the FedEx Series on the PGA Tour. And of course, within that, we all share the 4 major championships. So it was previously known as the European Tour, but in 2022, DP World came on board. DP World are the leading provider of global supply chain and logistics solutions, and they came on board as the title sponsor. So we became the DP World Tour. So the European Tour group is still the overarching brand which administers it. So we've got the DP World Tour. We have the Challenge Tour, which I think is equivalent to the PGA Tour's Corn Ferry Tour, just, I guess, given perhaps a US audience, the comparisons might help. We also have the Legends Tour, which is our sort of champions equivalent. And we have a new G4D Tour. So G4D is the acronym Golf for the Disabled Tour, which is a joint initiative we launched with EDGA, the European Disabled Golf Association. So many acronyms in our world.
Right.
So we launched that in 2022 and created the platform for golfers with a disability to play on our championship courses. So we have around 7 to 8 events on our schedule. We have a series finale, which we have coming up in the calendar, as well as the G4D Open, which is our major joint with the RNA. So we created the G4D Tour, and the European Tour is also the managing partner of the Ryder Cup alongside the PGA of America. So the DP World Tour is effectively our main men's tour. It's our biggie. It's where we focus most of our efforts at the moment.
Yeah. Well, it's once again, I had no idea about the scope of, what you're involved with. It's really quite impressive. So CSR role opens up, you land the position, and you've been quite busy since starting with them. The scope of your sustainability program is really outstanding. And tell us what prompted the development of the program. Tell us about some of the goals. What are the key pillars? My understanding, the umbrella is kind of golf for good, but then Green Drive is just part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Golf for Good really came around during the pandemic. So many professional sports ground to a halt. And, we were all at home, and we realized that when sport came back, we were very lucky in golf that we were able to get up and running behind closed doors fairly early on. But we recognized as a business that there needed to be more. It couldn't just be sport. We needed to give back to local communities. We created Golf for Good to try and do that, to raise funds, to hero local NHS workers, and really to bring a bit more profile to what we were doing rather than just. So Golf for Good was founded then, and it really has organically grown from, I guess, partners' demand effectively to demonstrate more strategically what we're doing. So our line would be that Golf for Good is our commitment to driving golf further in an environmentally and socially sustainable way, and ensuring a long-term positive impact on the courses, countries and communities we visit. And I think I do think it's interesting because we often look at sustainability in an entirely environmental way, but actually you've got to consider the social implications as well. When we talk about how sustainable is golf, we can't only consider it from an environmental perspective. We've got to think about the people. Who are the people playing? Where is the future fan base? Are we being inclusive in what we're doing? And I think that for us has been really important. And I think we've tried to keep things simple. I think the best strategies have to be simple. They have to be authentic. They have to be, it has to be very clear as to what you're doing and your why. If it's too complicated to explain, should you be doing it? So our Golf for Good is our overarching brand and our CSR program effectively. Green Drive, as you mentioned, is our environmental program, which I know we're going to come onto in a bit more detail. We also have the G4D Tour, which is our sort of inclusion program. And then we have Golf Futures, which is the newer addition to the stable. And that really covers community education and participation and the opportunity for us to give back and create legacy in the markets in which we play. And I think the education piece is really quite interesting because we aren't in a position where we have unlimited funds to create that local impact. We would love to be, but we need to be realistic about our resources. And I think inspiration is something that, if I say it doesn't cost us anything, I mean, it does. Of course, there's a cost to everything, but it's something that we can do so authentically to open our doors and say, to local sort of 16, 17-year-olds who, like myself, had no idea that careers in sport existed. But to say, look at the golf ball on the screen. What careers do you think exist? And, it's fascinating because you start a conversation and a handful of people put their hands up and, maybe they know that a caddy's involved. Maybe they know there might be a manager. And by the end of the session, they're aware that there are opportunities in social media, in broadcast, in communications, in PR. And these are all 4 different departments, that if they're interested in science, that there's a route down agronomy, they're aware that there are just so many areas to professional sport that they wouldn't have ever been aware of. So that for me has been a really powerful part of what we're trying to do, to try and it will not only then shape their sort of education and potentially open their horizons, which I think is something that's quite important to me. But equally then, from a golf industry perspective, we're potentially diversifying who comes through the doors. And I'm not a golfer. I love the sports industry and I'm very passionate about what I do in golf. But I think it's really important for people from all walks of life to work in our industry, because that's how we become stronger and better. So that's been a really great addition to our Golf for Good program. So yeah, I think that's probably it in a nutshell.
Yeah, well, that's great. And the vision and the philosophy of it being not just environmental and also being social, I think is very important. And we could do a 3-hour episode if we dug deep into each of the 3 sections. But for this particular episode, and I hope it's the first of several conversations we have, I'd really like to focus on the environmental side. So in drilling down a little further on the Green Drive program, I mean, it's clearly cutting edge, as evidenced by the fact that you recently, I mean, it's like 30 days ago, you received a very important recognition and award from the Sports Positive Group, where you received their Transformation Award, which really recognized the program as the most transformative sustainability program in all of sports. And if I've overstated it or understated it, please feel free to correct me. But tell us about the award and then give us an overview of the principal components of the program.
Thank you. Yes, at the moment, I feel like it couldn't be overstated enough. We're all delighted. I think it meant so much to us. I think it's safe to say we didn't see it coming. We've just been so sort of focused on what we're doing. We don't often look sideways to other industries to sort of really compare and contrast, but having that sort of industry and peer recognition really has meant a lot. So yeah, it's meant a huge amount to the people who've been closely working on it, because it's that sort of rubber stamp of you're on the right track, you're okay, you're hanging in there. So our Green Drive specifically focuses on sort of 4 pillars: climate action and emissions reduction, circular economy, so looking at where we can reduce natural resources, we can recycle what we do use, making sure that we're very considered with our waste, etc. Social impact, which we've obviously touched on, creating more inclusive landscape, making sure our game is open to all. And then, of course, nature conservation. We need nature to play our sport. So encouraging biodiversity, protecting what we can. So those are our sort of 4 pillars. Green Drive was established in 2021 on World Earth Day. And we launched a strategy then. We revised it in 22 when we signed up to the United Nations Sports for Climate Action Pledge, alongside around 200 other global sporting bodies, some of whom have been in this sphere for a while. But we were the first golf tour to do so. And I think that's been quite an interesting journey for us. It feels like we are hopefully showing a bit of leadership within perhaps the golf industry, and certainly trying to work closely alongside other sports who are trying to sort of push the needle. And it's not always easy. There are so many barriers to what we're trying to achieve. But I think equally we're very lucky with certainly the people we have working within our industry and how collaborative they can be. So that was our target has been set, and it's a big one. And I know there are question marks as to, do you do a lot more research and get your ducks in a row? And I think for us, we know how big the task is at hand, and it's really an aspirational target for us to aim high and to jump in and see what we can do. And we just had to get going. So we have really looked at how we approach this with tournaments specifically that we work on. We have over 100 tournaments across our tours. And again, that can be quite overwhelming to unpick. And I think you could spend a lot of time, getting into a bit of an existential crisis as to where to start there. But we broke it down into those, the tournaments that we own and control and we have full control over, and then our headquarters. So us as a business, our staff, how they travel, where they stay, how they commute, what do we purchase, the buildings that we own and operate, the cars we own and operate, our own assets. So we've focused on that as a business, our sort of HQ piece. And then we have established 10 events across our tours. And those are the bigger events that have more resource, that have, whether that's operational or whether it's financial. And then there are also the events on our schedule that are stable, and our schedule can change. Sometimes, we have new promoters that join. Sometimes we have, a partner who might look to have an event in a certain area, and we will pivot and we will create that. So again, we need to be mindful of the cost of sustainability, from a headcount perspective as well as a bottom line perspective. So we've been working on these 10 events, and we've sort of loosely nicknamed the Sustainable 10, the Carbon 10. It varies on who we're talking to, but those have really been vital for us to deep dive into understanding everything operationally. We have calculated the carbon emissions for each of those 10 events across all 3 scopes to the best of our abilities. It's not always perfect, but I think that's the point. Sustainability isn't perfect. You're not going to package it up and tie a bow around it. It's a labor of love. You've got to keep going. It's a continually learning and evolving industry. And I think that's one of the things that we certainly find really fascinating about it. So we have those 10 events. We have a bespoke approach really to each of our events. I can't sit here in HQ and mandate to each of the events what they should be doing. We've got to really try and see what's available in each market. And I think we are seeing some really interesting evolutions. We went with the approach of having a sustainability first mentality. So embed sustainability in your thinking. So it's actually in our business KPIs, which has been, I think, very interesting. It's fascinating when it comes to end of year and you have other departments saying, I have sustainability as a KPI. What can my department do? And I've certainly seen certain things move quickly from that, which has been brilliant. But also just, from an event perspective, what are you doing? Can it be more sustainable? And if not, why not? Maybe next year. But we've got to embed it in our thinking. And I think we've really seen some positive results from that.
Yeah, that's great. Well, listen, without question, you get what you measure is a saying that I subscribe to. And when you put sustainability as a KPI in everyone's job description, miraculously, you have everyone focused on it. So congratulations on whatever role you played in actually making that happen. In looking at the Green Drive program and in talking to people responsible for sustainability and other tours, the kind of waste and recycling is always core. Trying to eliminate plastic water bottles is core. Clean transportation is core. I had the good fortune to attend the Ryder Cup last year in Italy, and it was wonderful how everything was coordinated. And as soon as you entered Marco Simone, there was a massive 150-foot wide by 15-foot high wall with sustainability messaging around all the things that you were doing. So I think the execution around this plan at the Ryder Cup was fantastic. A couple things that you're doing that I think are unusual that I want to get into it a little more detail are kind of what you're doing around energy and what you're doing with suppliers. How did you go about establishing the baseline for your carbon footprint? And then tell us a little more about the energy programs. Like you've used hydrogen at a couple of events. You're using biofuel. You've got solar tied in. Tell us about that.
Well, when we started looking at our strategy back in 21, it's really interesting because actually when I start sort of unpeeling the layers, we've actually got records of sustainability programs back from 1997's Ryder Cup. So the history's there in terms of, the European Tour group being aware of the impact that sustainability plays in our day-to-day operations from a championship perspective. And when we started looking into it in 2021, we were able to establish sort of a boundary map fairly quickly, because there are so many components to what we do and so many sort of joint ventures within it. You look at European Tour Productions, which is our broadcast arm, but actually they sit under, it's called the Albert certification. They sit under a separate sort of umbrella and program around trying to be sustainable productions. We've got various pockets that are all already doing things within their own industries. So we were able to establish that sort of fairly quickly and understand then our responsibilities from an event perspective. And then within that, it's just been a case of slowly picking them off, trying to understand them. There have been some things where we had to make assumptions. We've got some interesting examples of, some assumptions, some data, going back through sort of old bills and trying to tally them up and, either retrofitting assumptions. But again, I think the thing about a baseline is you've got to start somewhere. And it's interesting as you start calculating emissions, even though we are doing so much more than we were 3 years ago, so much more, but our emissions keep rising because we keep getting better data. So we have to take it with a pinch of salt to some extent. And we know that we're moving the needle in terms of being more strategic about where we're sourcing things from, reducing freight and haulage. There are so many examples of areas that we know we're reducing. So we hang on to that, and we try not to take everything too literally, because again, it's very easy to get quite overwhelmed by what we have to do. So in terms of energy, I think you're right. It's such an interesting area, and it's an area we're seeing such innovation in. And, it's one of the challenges with working across so many markets is you can't apply a blanket, we're going to do this across the whole tour, because it just doesn't work. It's not going to be possible. But one of the great things is the various innovations that keep coming up in different markets. So as an example, we mentioned the Ryder Cup, segueing a little bit away from energy, but when we were looking at bus tenders, so transport providers for the Volvo Cars Scandinavian Mixed, one of our events in Sweden, when we were looking at bus tenders in 2022, every single bus provider had electric buses. Whereas when we were running the tender for buses for the Ryder Cup, I think at the time, Rome City Council were trialing one electric vehicle. So again, you can't compare. They're such different. Everyone is working to a different pace, and what's available in one market is not available in another. And I'm sure it's very similar in the US, where you have different states moving at different paces. So you mentioned hydrogen. Our broadcast for the BMW PGA, which is one of our flagship events, was entirely powered by hydrogen in 2023, green hydrogen, and that's been really exciting. It's a local company, Geopura, who are starting to do more and more. And actually, I think that was a world first in terms of, a global event being broadcast. We managed to take that to Northern Ireland this year, which is, again, really exciting, because one of the more challenging pieces around hydrogen is how you transport it. And again, that's something we've seen through biofuels as well. We started using biofuel in the UK in 21 at some of our events, and it's quite a cost difference. There's a reasonable markup on that, but it reduces your emissions by 95%. So we've been able to justify it in several instances, and that's been really rewarding. But it's not readily available across all of our events. So again, it's just understanding what can be. We've seen great examples of our event in Denmark, for instance, was able to use primarily grid electricity, and then what they needed, where they needed a little bit of a boost, they were able to use battery. So that was a new innovation this year, which we hadn't really had events powered by battery. Perhaps the build, because again, these guys are on site for 6 weeks pre, perhaps 6 weeks post. I'm probably doing it disservice. It's probably more like 3 months pre. But again, we're able to often use different sources for that build, whether it's solar panels on roofs, whether it's solar and battery, obviously a little bit of grid. We've been quite clever, and I think hybrid is going to be where we all end up. I don't think there's going to be one single source. But yeah, hydrogen's been a really interesting one. And I think we've also seen in Dubai last year at the DP World Tour Championships, which is our end of year season finale, we had a whole sustainability lounge where the build, rather than using timber, was made from palm board. Everything inside was as sustainably sourced as possible. And then it was fueled. We had a brilliant partnership with a local supplier, and it was fueled by a hybrid of solar that would then kick into hydrogen when the solar was depleted. And it was fascinating because obviously data is key. And the data showed us that the solar would power the lounge until 2 p.m. And after that, then the hydrogen would kick in. So again, that's great learnings because now we know. And now we can look at solar for X amount of time or X amount of load. So yeah, there's just loads of fascinating innovations that are cropping up. It's a sector that I think is really meaty, and we're keen to get our teeth into a little bit more next year.
Yeah. Well, really, it's so exciting to hear about the things you're doing. I mean, a very innovative approach to things. And what I find interesting is you mentioned data 4 times at least. And as people advance in their sustainability journey, what they realize is it's almost more of a data game than anything else. Data becomes more and more important the further and further along that you get. And it sounds like the realization of the importance of kind of capturing good data is something that has clearly registered with the DP World Tour.
I think it has. I think it helps you, it informs decision making, and it also provides the backbone to storytelling. And I think that's become really key because we need to talk about this more. We need to educate our fans. We need them to understand the connection between their actions and nature and the sport that they love. And sometimes there's messages land in different ways, but people respect data. So for us, it's been really key in terms of sharing messaging that sort of reverts back to data that exists. So there's no point having data unless you're going to use it. So we've got to be careful about how we get it and why, because you could get lost in trying to collect data for data's sake. So we try and collect it and use it sensibly.
Yeah. Well, two other areas of innovation that I'd like to address regarding data is that you've put programs in place for monitoring player emissions and also fan emissions. And I don't know of any other groups that are doing that right now. I know it's also a big issue in the trade show industry, as I'd talk to you, where kind of fan travel or attendee travel is so big. Tell us a little about the programs that you have around tracking and reducing player emissions and fan emissions.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it comes back to that 4-letter word, data again. Earlier this year, we launched an impact report, a sustainability impact report. We published our learnings from some of our 2022 events versus our 2023. So a bit of a comparison year on year. What are our learnings? And actually, we published some numbers in that as well, which again, I don't think it's been done in golf before. So again, we just wanted to showcase the why and hope that it inspires others to perhaps do the same or to investigate what they were doing. So within that, we learnt that 80% of our emissions were from fan and player travel. And again, that really helped us. We knew it would be quite high, but having that sort of clear data and knowing that sort of split, when you're looking at your event emissions, you've got to break it down into things you can control and things you can influence. And I think what we realized was that actually for the things we can influence, we should be doing something about that. So within the things we can control, we know that we're already doing things. We can control the suppliers we work with. We have procurement codes. We have sustainability embedded in our tender process. We have it in our contracts. And I think we can probably come onto that as a section in a minute, that whole sort of supplier and suppliers as a stakeholder. But within the players and fans, it was a no-brainer really for us to think about helping educate and raise awareness and draw an alignment to the impact of both the stakeholders and their travel. So we launched earlier this year in April with a company called AQ Green Tech, who are a carbon broker who have created a really simple and straightforward, it's brilliant platform that we could work with them on to pass that out to our fans. So around all of our events now, everyone coming to our event has the opportunity to play their part in reducing our emissions. They can calculate their emissions, they can measure them, they can offset them as well if they'd like. And again, we've provided incentives for that, because I think in order to change behavior, you do need to incentivize people. And I think that behavior change piece is a really interesting piece. I wish I had more time to get into the psychology of behavior change, but I'm fascinated by the people aspect of it. So we launched that, and it's been very interesting to see. We try and promote it in a similar way at each event. We include it in pre-event communications. We include something on site. We include it in our post-event communications. And it's been really interesting, again, to look at culturally which events it's been more successful in. It's not always sustainability doesn't translate the same ways in different markets. So that's been quite an interesting learning. And it just goes back to that sort of angle of you can't broad brush sustainability. It's going to grow organically and be different in different markets. So we launched that in April. We've seen quite an interesting success, certainly in the UK markets, actually. The really interesting piece is on our website. It's hidden in under sort of a ticketing toggle. And it's had, a couple of months ago, so fairly early on, it had over sort of 15,000 individual hits on it, which I thought was fascinating, because it means, and that is really important to me, because it means that people are questioning it. It might not be for them just yet, but they're curious. And I think curiosity is the first part of us having that conversation, engaging and potentially being able to influence. So that having that dialogue with fans has been really powerful. Seeing the interest has been, I think, fascinating, and it's been there's been a lot more interest in it than I would have thought, and that's been really rewarding. And the second part to that is then looking at our players. And again, we're a members organisation, so everything we do is for our players. So I think we have a responsibility to help them understand the impact they have. And again, we need to be mindful of our role. So where we can look at the schedule, and again, it's not as straightforward as it might seem. Creating the schedule is a real challenge sometimes, in terms of just ensuring that it can perhaps flow in the right way, that the players can travel in the right way, that the promoters can hold the events that week. It's a complex piece of work, but where we can, we have tried to geo-structure it. But again, ultimately, we want to help the players understand their impact too. So we have built into the player portal, our tech team have now created an opportunity for the players to offset their emissions. So we announced that at the BMW PGA earlier this year, and it will be launching in the next 2 weeks for our 2025 schedule. So fingers crossed. We have a couple of players who already offset their emissions. So it'll be really interesting to see how this goes.
Yeah. Well, look, it's really no wonder why you won that transformation award, because it's clear that the work that you're doing with this sustainability plan, it's had a dramatic impact on your operations. I want to talk about partnerships, but before we talk about partnerships, I'd like to talk about the one other piece that ties into this, because you've mentioned it a couple times, and that's suppliers. Most companies, I'll never forget working with Walmart, in a prior life in corporate sustainability, when they realized supplier emissions were the largest part of their scope 3 emissions. And it was very challenging for them to engage suppliers, gather data on their suppliers, and then have their suppliers take action. You recently announced an award program targeting supplier sustainability efforts. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing on that dimension.
Yeah, I realized fairly early on the scope of our supplier network. And again, with 44 events across 24 countries, I'll let you do the maths and guess how many suppliers we have. I think we're sitting around 2,500, which is a lot, and of course you can get, like everything, you can get hung up on all the smaller suppliers, or you can look at some of the bigger ones. And I think one of the things that was important to us is to appreciate the role, to your point on Walmart, to appreciate the role that suppliers play in our success. And it's really important to us that they are on board with what we're doing. And I think, I've known of situations where someone might have a role equivalent to mine, and they've got that because at tender stage, the rights holder turned around to the supplier and said, "We will only appoint you if you have someone focused on sustainability in your business." And that, for me, when I realized that, I realized the role that we could play in inspiring suppliers and encouraging them and bringing them on the journey with us. And I think that's been a really big awareness piece for me. How can we let them know this is what we're doing, and how can we encourage them to join? And at some point, perhaps, how do we mandate it? And we're not there yet. I think we've talked a few times around how everything is evolving at different paces, for us across the markets we're in. So I don't think we're in a position yet to mandate. And, you've got to be pretty confident you're walking the walk before you start, going down that route. So we would really like to hero some of the suppliers who are making a difference to our events. So we started out, we're looking this year at just the events in the Middle East. And again, we have 100 events across all of our tours. So again, this is really across all of our events in the Middle Eastern region, on either of the tours, whether they're our events or another one. If you're a supplier to one of those events, we want to hear from you. So we're really excited to see how it goes. And I'm sure it will be, slow at first. I hope it will snowball and become a lot bigger. We have aspirations to make it a little bit broader next year and to extend to perhaps definitely other markets, perhaps the whole tours. So we'll need to see how that goes. But we really want to raise awareness for some of the great work that's being done. We want to hear the suppliers that are doing great work, and we want to then inspire others. We want to show other markets what other events are doing, because we hope that's the way that everyone will realize, what's in the art of the possible. So yeah, we're excited to see where that goes. And having won an award ourselves recently in this area, we know how motivating it can be.
Yeah, well, that's brilliant. And, you talk about behavior change, and the power of recognition is really substantial. And the fact that you are going to not only ask your suppliers, but act, but then recognize those that do a great job is really very smart. And look, every program starts small. And what you'll find over time is the number of suppliers participating will increase. And then hopefully you'll see how those suppliers then put similar plans in place for their suppliers. I mean, getting back to that Walmart analogy, they originally received a lot of pushback from suppliers about needing to provide data and pay attention to this. But then you find out that large companies like PepsiCo, after they're being required to do it for Walmart, they then wind up requiring their suppliers to do it. So you have this great ripple effect. So it's a great program. Glad you're pioneering it, and look forward to learning more about it.
Thank you.
Okay, on to partnerships. It's, better than anyone that sustainability is a team sport, and you need association partners, supplier partners. I know you've got a great working relationship with the Geo Foundation. What's your point of view on the role that partnerships is playing in your sustainability journey?
It's all about partnerships. I always say, sustainability is not a competition. There's no winning. There's no I and T. We all know that the sayings, but partnerships are vital. And even if you look at the sustainability development goals, number 17 is partnerships. For it's vital to everything that everyone's going to achieve. And I think it doesn't need to be a formalized partnership. Partnership can take so many different roles. And if I look at our, what we are achieving across the various events, we have a plethora of partners who are really helping us make a difference. And I hope that we are also helping them make a difference. I hope that we are as good a partner as others are to us. You mentioned the Geo Sustainable Golf Foundation. They're our sort of North Star in the golf industry. We're incredibly lucky to have them. And we work hand in glove, that they consider themselves an extension of us and our team, which is a real privilege for us. We also work with the Gold Standard, who are one of our offsetting partners. And again, through GEO, they've created a driving net zero portfolio of offsetting programs. So again, we wouldn't be able to do that without Gold Standard. Within our huge supplier database, there's some incredible suppliers who are doing great things. CSM Live, then they've now become Wasserman, so Wasserman Live, looking at what they do around some of our branding and how they try and reduce, reuse, recycle some of the initiatives that they are bringing to our events. And again, it's tricky because we often talk about using local suppliers. You don't always need to use the big supplier who's across many markets. Sometimes it is better to go local for many reasons. And there's an example in Dubai who springs to life. They're called Averda, and they have been systematically reducing waste to landfill in the Middle East. And that's been a really tricky thing until fairly recently. So just today was looking at one of their reports from a sustainability perspective and what they're managing to achieve as a tournament supplier. It's extraordinary. They're really moving the needle for us. So there's so many examples. At the BMW PGA, we give last year from our food waste, we recycled it with a food charity. I think it was City Harvest in London, and we gave over 3,000 meals from leftover food from our BMW PGA event. And it's little things like that I think make a big difference to us and what we can achieve. We're very lucky to have so many partners and suppliers who are helping us achieve brilliant things.
Yeah, you've got it all going on. I'm so impressed by all the work that you're doing. Once again, it's no surprise you won this transformation award. It will be great to continue to watch and follow your progress. And congratulations on all of the important work that you've done, Maria, along with your team.
Well, it's a very big team effort. So yeah, thank you very much. It means a lot.
Yeah. Well, we now move on to a part of our show where I really like to get our audience to know our guests a little better on a personal level. So we'll move on from talking about Green Drive to talking about you, Maria. What drives you?
Being able to make a difference, I think, is really important to me. I think health, whether that is healthy environment or mental health, I feel very strongly that everyone has the right to standards in life, and it's something that's really driven me to always work in areas and in my personal life as well, to be in environments where I can try and give back. And it's one of the reasons I love sport as a platform to drive that change. And I recently became a mother, and I think being a full-time working mother is not without its sacrifices, as I'm sure you know. But it's really important to me that if I'm choosing to leave my son to work full-time, that what I'm doing is making a difference and moving the needle. So I think everyone who knows me would say I'm fairly passionate about what I'm doing, whether it's in work, out of work, but I'm all in, and I would like to make a difference.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I love the world of sustainability is that you find that people that gravitate to this business, it's a calling, and there's a common thread of wanting to make a difference and leave the world a better place for for the next generation. And I have the greatest admiration for, working mothers. My wife, we've raised 3 kids. And now my daughter had our first grandchild, and she's now back to work full time. And the juggling that women do when they're trying to do their best to raise a family and have a career, it's incredible. And I've got just tremendous respect for that. So,
thank you, and congratulations on your granddaughter. That's very exciting.
Yes, Grandpa's a great title.
Yeah, it is. It's the best.
So who has inspired you? And it could be personally, it could be related to work, whatever comes to mind, Maria.
It's funny because if you'd asked me this question even a couple of years ago, I think the answer would have been very different. And it's funny how this can change depending on what sort of season of your life you're in. But I think I'm on a bit of a theme here with the working mother piece. And I'm not complaining in any way, shape or form, because it's a privilege to be able to go to work. And I'm a better mother for working. It definitely brings out the best in me. And I'm a better mother for my son because of it. But I have my old boss, Belinda, is probably the most incredible example of a working mother. And I don't know how she did it. I used to think at the time, she exhausted me with her energy, and I don't know. I still do, to this day, I don't know where it ever came from, but she was extraordinary. She still is extraordinary. She has a stepdaughter and then a first daughter of her own, and then twins. And they spanned, at one point, I think during lockdown, they spanned sort of, I want to say 18, 11 and 4. And I mean, I don't know how you do that. Wow. And head up a department and manage everything that goes on within that. And her attitude and energy and just ability to always be sort of glass half full and keep going, it inspired me at the time, but it was less relevant because I wasn't in the same place. And now that I am, I also have a stepdaughter. And again, that sort of the generational differences, the juggle, the everything. Yeah, I think she's someone that's really shown me how things can be done. And it's a juggle that is fairly relentless, but it's obviously, and you know this better than I do, it's all worth it.
I see how that could be an incredible source of inspiration. And my sense is you're going to be a source of inspiration for many as time goes on. What's the greatest challenge that you've faced?
That's a tricky one, isn't it? It's funny. I was listening a couple of weeks ago. I think you interviewed Brazos, my counterpart at the PGA Tour, and he referenced his father passing. And I was in a very similar boat. I lost my father nearly 20 years ago now. And everything he was saying about how, obviously it's always hard and it's acute at the time. And then it lessens, but it still crops up. And especially when you're going through that sort of new circumstances and new parts of your life, and you'd expect your parent to be there. So I think a mixture of that, because what he said really, I remember listening to it and it really resonated at the time. And also at the same time, becoming a stepmother, because that is a very interesting dynamic. And again, I love people and I love psychology, and the dynamics are fascinating. And it's very rare to find sort of a set of circumstances that mirror yours. So there's not very much literature that's helpful when you're navigating this, and there's a lot of very bad cultural references out there about stepmothers and who they are and how they behave and, what they've done. And I think navigating that with grace has been quite a challenge and a learning curve. And, I'm so lucky because my stepdaughter is just the most lovely girl. But it's been a real learning curve for me, and also recognizing some of my thoughts and tackling those. And it will be an evolution. Like sustainability, it will be an evolution. It will be a continual learning curve. Every year brings a different challenge. So yeah, going with that, and also my son turning 2, I've pretty much got a toddler and a teenager. So yes, I'm very aware that I'm in for a wild ride.
Yes, your greatest challenge may be
yes,
coming.
Yeah. Yeah, let's have this conversation in 3 years' time. And
yes.
See what the answer is.
Yeah. Well, we have, you've touched on this a little bit in your answers here, but I do want to give you an opportunity to expand on it. And that is, Maria, what would you like to leave behind for future generations?
I'd like to leave behind a healthy planet and a healthy mindset. I would love culturally for us to go back to maybe where we were a couple of years ago, where we weren't glued to technology for all the wrong reasons. And I appreciate the irony of us talking on our laptops now across the world. And isn't that a wonderful thing? And I'm so grateful to technology for that, for many reasons. But, if you look at our societies and where we are, and I'd love us to be able to go back to a healthier, more simple, nature-filled time. I think that would be, if we achieve that in our lifetimes, we'll have done okay.
Sport helps accomplish that. And getting more people involved with the game certainly works towards that that purpose. Maria, I have found you to be an incredibly thoughtful, passionate, driven executive and mom. And I'm just so privileged to have been able to share this time and have this conversation with you. So thank you so very much.
Well, thank you very much. The pleasure has been all mine. I've so enjoyed getting to know you over the last couple of days.
Totally my pleasure. And to our audience, thanks so much for sharing your time with us during this conversation. And I would imagine you're as blown away as I am about the work that Maria is doing on the DP World Tour. She's an example of the type of industry leader that I try to get connected with on the Golf Sustainability Podcast in the interest of helping advance best practices in both environmental and social sustainability. If you enjoyed our conversation today, please subscribe to the podcast, tell your colleagues and friends about us, and keep on watching and listening to future episodes of the show. Thanks very much for joining us today, and have a great day.